My name's Travis Alexander. I'm a postdoc in medical humanities at Rice University, where I work on the Translational Humanities for Public Health project. Today we're going to hear um, from Dr. Catherine Gudis, who's an associate professor of history at UC Irvine. And she's going to tell us a little bit about a project she's been working on called The Real Pandemic, Coronavirus and Logistics in LA and the Inland Empire. So Catherine, if you could tell us a little bit about your academic background and kind of the steps you took both in getting to Riverside and then getting to this work you're doing now, that'd be awesome.
Sure, great. Well, thank you so much for the chance to talk with you about this project. I define my own work as a public and environmental humanities scholar. So I'm very interested in being able to work not only in public participatory research and memory work, but to actually find different projects that are serving a larger function societally towards racial justice and equity. And so this project on the real pandemic was something that students and community partners who formed a coalition to, in its early iterations, to try and resist the incursion of an Amazon air cargo hub at an airport in the area of Riverside and San Bernardino. So a coalition was formed among labor and environmental justice workers, and they brought different community members together. So it included Teamsters, included youth groups, it included an organization that we're very closely partnered with called People's Collective for Environmental Justice. And so together we formed a coalition, and the work that we were focused on related to the ways in which COVID was increasingly impacting those Amazon workers, laborers, and also while in other parts of the country or even in the county, the air quality improved as the freeways were less crowded. We didn't find that that was the case in the areas that we were focused on in San Bernardino and Riverside counties, which are called inland ports because of the ways in which e-commerce has functioned to create particular areas as essentially sacrifice zones where lots of trucks and trains rumble through with their exhaust and the other impacts of their travel through communities. And so while the ports of LA and Long Beach slowed down, they didn't stop, and they were under increased pressure to convey more goods through trucks in order to get to that, last mile stop, as they say. And so lots of e-commerce was taking place during COVID, and we recognized that those impacts on labor, on environment, on the people in the region who are essentially the essential workers needed to be recorded so that we'd have it as documentation later, but also as part of our larger efforts to agitate and to advocate on behalf of community members who are affected. And so this project fit in very neatly with the Climates of Inequality, Stories of Environmental Justice, which is a traveling exhibition, set of public programs and digital platform that UC Riverside, along with 22 other cities and universities and community groups, put together. And so the Humanities Action Lab is this umbrella title for this group that came together and produced this traveling exhibit. And during the pandemic, we came together again to meet regularly to talk about the impacts on, different communities related to the pandemic. So this project, The Real Pandemic, came out of that. And we actually also created, the small group of us met with our community partners to try and determine what they would want to see. And so one of the things they wanted was easy public education tools, and also ways to humanize what might be abstract ideas about how you get your goods delivered to your front door. So that's why we did some oral histories. We also did a zine that explained the issues, and then a mock Amazon ad that was part of what we circulated during the pandemic.
And were you working on this with undergrads at UCR, grad students? Like what was the academic footprint of the thing?
Yeah, sure. We were really lucky that, and this sort of plays into the ongoing work that we've been able to do on this project. We were lucky that we had been working on these partnerships previously and been working with undergraduate students as well as graduate students on the Humanities Action Lab project. And that there's a documentary filmmaker who had been working to help me put together the final cuts for videos that went into the exhibit. And she was interested in continuing, as were the individuals from the environmental justice groups that we had been working with. And so we worked together, and then I had a couple of undergraduates who live in the area, whose own family members are warehouse workers, and they participated in the project as well. In fact, one of them, it's her husband who's a warehouse worker that we interviewed, because they were really facing tough times in terms of, his own asthma and health complications, and working in, he was actually a janitor in a warehouse. So that was even worse, because he had a lot of toxic materials he was supposed to be cleaning up as part of his job. So those were some of the people who participated in the project. But we were meeting like every few weeks with both the organizing group, which was it's the group that was trying to resist the Amazon incursion, and then also with the Humanities Action Lab participants. So it was a really great way to weather elements of COVID, because we had a community to be able to speak with.
Yeah, I bet. One thing you referred to the Inland Empire and adjacent areas as a kind of sacrifice zone earlier. I wonder if you could explain a little bit about what you mean by that term, and the way in which that kind of geographical region meets that definition for you.
Yeah. So there are two elements to it. One is that the area is an inland port, meaning the land at one point, and I think COVID has changed this tremendously. The pandemic has changed the values of the property out here, because e-commerce is, because there's such a demand for increasing warehouse and distribution space. But basically, the area was considered very inexpensive, and in a transformational moment in the 70s and 80s, big parcels of land, because they were formerly agriculture, and in some cases toxically so. Dairy farms are not a popular feature in a lot of inland communities, and so they were converted in large scale, in large square footage parcels for warehouses, for distribution, and it's adjacent to rail lines and to major freeways. And so there are two phrases that oftentimes describe those people who live adjacent to those areas, which are largely people of color and recent immigrant groups, as well as working white poor. And so because of the confluence of trucks, freeways, rail yards, and not just any rail yards, they're intermodal rail yards, meaning that trucks pull up to them to be able to either pick up or drop off containers. And so there are many lanes of traffic, and people live in the area of them. And so the people living in those areas oftentimes suffer from much higher rates of asthma, much worsened air quality. And we haven't even begun to look at the ways in which the billion square feet of warehouses have concreted over landscapes that used to be agricultural, with a water table that was fairly close to the surface, but now we have no water absorption, and we don't have means to sort of regreen either. And so no one's really done the work of measuring the heat impacts, heat islands, in relationship to the warehouses either. And so all of this taken together suggests that particular areas have been targeted because they are the least enfranchised historically, and have been the most disinvested in historically, and are populated by those who have been forced to live beside the most pollution. So that's why we call them sacrifice zones. And in some cases, we also call them diesel death zones, because of all of those lanes of heavy diesel particulate matter, in the neighborhoods where people live and where they work.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Amazon commercial satire you guys produced. I wonder if you could, are there any digital artifacts that people who are interested in this work could go look up or see the work you guys have been doing?
Yeah.
Or are there essays that will come out of this project?
Yeah. So there are several different things. We actually were really pleased that through the process of working with community groups, they recognize the value of the humanities, which I've always grappled with in doing this work around the logistics industry and changing land use in the region, because I know what scientists can offer, right? They can offer a particular kind of data that can show, for instance, that children's lungs are stunted by in development in terms of their proximity to particulate matter. Or we can do measurements of the heat within the containers and the impact on laborers because it exceeds cost. But where are the humanities in all of that? And so what was really interesting to learn over the course of our work very closely with community members is that there's a real need to deploy history and the humanities in two ways. In one way, it's to document what people have been saying, to humanize their stories. And the other way is to preserve it, because what we're seeing is that this has been a gradual process, a slow violence of the supply chain. And so we're able to offer those kinds of sound bites that will make it resonate for people who may not understand the issues, even if they live among the issues. And so what we're planning to do is and what we're doing right now, in fact, is to continue the work of documentation, to continue to produce micro documentaries that you'll see at the Climates of Inequality webpage or digital platform for LA and inland Southern California. And then we've also paired with our public TV station, KCET, and we're posting digital essays, or what I'm calling transmedia essays, so that they can reach or the stories can be reconfigured to reach a different population through them. And the Humanities Action Lab has had funding from the Mellon for minority serving institutions like ours to be able to continue this work to build climate leadership among students and community partners. And so that's been a really important way to galvanize people to enter into the larger political and community organizing, work that is required to really change the ways that legislation has really supported commerce and e-commerce specifically over the interests of public health and community members who suffer the most consequences of that.
That sounds fascinating. Well, then I guess by way of signing off, I will encourage people to go check out that work. And can you say one more time what the name of the website is where people can find it?
Sure. It's called The Climates of Inequality. So it's climatesofinequality.org. And you can look through lots of different stories from different cities that interrelate these issues that I've been mentioning, as well as looking at the slow violence of the supply chain, which you could just Google and you'll come up with our specific contributions to that topic.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks again for talking with us a little bit about what you've been doing. And with that said, I will sign off.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.